All right. Looks like the webinar is now live. Perfect. Well, welcome everyone who is here. Uh, before we get started, I'd like to do a little bit of introduction of myself and some of the other people who are with us. We have myself. I am Brandon Van Tassel. I am the Director of Field Operations at Community Action Duluth, and one of the programs that I oversee is the Duluth Stream Corps, an organization that does a lot of reclamation, rehabilitation, on other restoration sites throughout the city of Duluth and its larger area. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get us moving here. With us tonight, we do have Lori Seele as well. I think she can unmute herself fairly shortly.
Hello, my name is Lori Seele. I run the Duluth Collaborative Invasive Species Management Area, known as the acronym CISMA, here in South St. Louis County. I want to welcome you tonight as well to the webinar, or to the webcast. Or I should say, before we get started here, if you could introduce yourself in the chat box on this side. You can also include the neighborhood you live in or a favorite Duluth park or trail. That'd be great. And a few housekeeping details. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our Google partner site. What we hope to accomplish tonight, we'll be going over introductions. We briefly did that. We will give you some brief background on the collective efforts happening near your neighborhoods. We'll go over some plant identification, invasive plants. And then we also want to hear from you with any tips or questions you may have, and we'll wrap up by 7 p.m. So that's what's on the docket for this evening.
All right, excellent. I would like to start by also acknowledging our funders. We have the Sustain Our Great Lakes, or SOGL, NIFWIF, and the GLRI, or the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Those are funders mainly to a lot of this work directly here tonight, but also a lot of the work that we have been doing over the last few years, and hopefully will continue to do into the future as well.
And I also would like to acknowledge the indigenous lands of the Ojibwe people that we are doing a lot of this invasive species and restoration work on in the Lake Superior watershed. And then I also want to acknowledge Rob too. He is with the Stewardship Network. He is working behind the scenes as a tech with us. And so anyway, he's on tonight, this evening as well. All right, so a little bit about our collaborative, the Duluth CISMA. Some of our major partners are listed, their logos are listed. We have 21 official partners and roughly 13 supporters, so supporting agencies and organizations, tribal, federal, state, local community organizations, the city of Duluth is a big partner as well. We're collectively working across property lines to manage invasive species and do restoration work. So this collaborative is something that you as a homeowner can participate in as well. In addition to our agency staff, we really appreciate when landowners are involved. It rounds us out a bit more, and we invite everyone to the table for it. So this collaborative started in May 2017 with a lot of high interest here. There's really good synergy going on. I'm not going to get into too many details about what we do, but I will let you know that for more info about our collaborative, you can visit the Stewardship Network website, our Duluth CISMA partner Google site, or our Facebook page for more information about our collaborative. And then before we move on to the next slide, I want to plug our next CISMA meeting. It's on Zoom again. It will be Tuesday, March 16th from 9 to 11 a.m. and everyone is welcome to attend. So that's a little bit about our collaborative here in South St. Louis County. All right. So for this evening, we're going to probably skip over the polls, but we were just curious if you have invasive plants on your property, or if you've tried controlling invasive plants on your property or property you have managed before. Okay.
All right, so a little as to why we are here. Right now we are overlooking some images over some of the current projects happening in the Kingsbury Bay and Grassy Point area. Entities, these include local government, state, federal, all sorts of money. Over $10 million has already been spent in these two project areas. Here in the Kingsbury Bay, we can see a lot of what was invasive narrowleaf cattails has been removed, as you can see in this picture. And we can also see in this picture up here, a new island being created and a sheltered bay for more habitat, both birds and for fish, in the estuary right off of Grassy Point. Now, the real reason that we are calling upon our neighbors is that we want to protect these investments. There are a lot of money, time, and passion has gone into this. And as you can see, a lot of work has been done. And we also have a lot of neighbors right directly adjacent to these areas. And invasive species tend not to care so much about our invisible property lines. They will spread however and wherever they can. And so we would like to make certain that we protect these investments and also help the landowners get a leg up.
All right, so what is an invasive species? Some of you may already know this answer, but the formal definition is one, that it is a non-native organism, and it is, or plant, and it causes harm to the environment, economy, or human health. We also include here in our collaborative that there's impacts to our cultural heritage and outdoor heritage. So you may have heard of emerald ash borer in our community, or gypsy moth in the news, zebra mussels, buckthorn, invasive knotweeds. But in invasive species, what's important to know is it has nothing to keep it in check. It's from elsewhere, so there's no predators keeping it in a good quantity. It goes nuts and goes out of control essentially. And the species may come here through various pathways. It could be through ornamental, maybe in the nurseries and the nursery industry. It could be shipping, travel, maybe even from the footwear on your you've been on a path or in some other location, other state even, and you bring it back to your yard, or your dog's been or cat has been out exploring in the woods and they come back with some seeds attached to their fur. So invasive species exist all over the globe, and there are invasive species from other countries that are not native here. But elsewhere, native species may be invasive in a different country. For example, so some of our invasives come from Asia or Europe or all over, any place really. And likewise, we have our goldenrod is invasive in Europe, for example. So it can work both ways. All right. So there's some economic costs to invasives. That's one of the reasons we really care about them. The picture on the left you'll see is a house here in Duluth, and that is knotweed, invasive knotweed growing out of it. So yes, knotweed can grow through your house foundation and pipes and all those kinds of things. So structural damage, there's cost to perform control work, and then also there's improper control. Sometimes people treat them incorrectly, and that's extra work and extra money as well. Economic costs, and then there's the healthcare costs. So the invasive plant in the middle photo is wild parsnip, which causes really bad burns. This plant, Brandon will discuss a bit later. It is one that is along the Wabashishi Trail, which is also known as the Western Waterfront Trail, the Downtown Lake Walk. It's found there, and also in Gary, New Duluth. And the collaborative continues to try managing it. We've also had some work days like on the trails in West Duluth. But really, this plant, if it continues to grow and spread, it could really cause impacts to recreation in parks and other safety issues in our yards and other places where we don't want to get burned. And on the right-hand side, the photo is of Phragmites, invasive Phragmites covering a speeding sign. And there's a lot of issues associated with invasive plants blocking or growing quickly. So mowing has to happen often. Sometimes Phragmites even catches on fire. So safety issues and health costs there. Environmental costs. For example, the left-hand photo, we have a native bird and some invasive berries like the Asian honeysuckle in the picture. They're junk food for our native birds and other animals. They can cause digestive problems, and then they also, of course, spit out or they poop out the berries everywhere to help seed them. So it's not really, they're not a preferred food item for the birds either, the native birds, that is. The other environmental costs that come on the right-hand photo of the knotweed canes, the dried stalks, they really can clog waterways. And in our riparian zones or our water-rich environment, this is a large concern for us here because we don't want all of our streams lined with knotweed, which is possible. Like out in the West Coast and East Coast, some of their streams are just loaded with knotweed. Then in the bottom right picture, you'll see a forest floor full of garlic mustard. And really, they're quite crafty. They're quite the imperialists. They really take over an area. Like the garlic mustard in the photo, they have lots of seed, they spread easily, and they also release a toxin or poison into the soil so that other plants cannot grow there. So there's a lot of environmental costs too. All right. Why should we even attempt management? Well, I love this quote here. Intellectuals solve problems, geniuses prevent them. This is all to say that early detection and prevention is key. Invasion ecology tells us that the longer an invasive species is around, the more damage it can cause and the higher costs it is to manage it. And then also it is harder to eradicate the longer it has been around and more established in an area. So it's really key on many areas why prevention and early detection is really important. All right, another thing we would like you to know is that many people in our area don't realize that the state of Minnesota and other states too actually have noxious weed laws that we need to follow. So those require us, in a nutshell, to manage in some form these plants that cause these damaging plants. So the biggest takeaway is we're not going to get into all the different regulatory statuses, but different invasive plants have different regulatory statuses. For example, some plants by law, if you have it on your property, you really need to try to eradicate it. While others, you need to make an effort to manage them or not transport them, or etc. So there's different rules for different things. If you want to learn more about that, the Department of Agriculture Minnesota Department of Agriculture has all that listed on their website too. All right, poll number 2, I think we'll skip for the purposes tonight. Brandon, do you want to take it away?
Yep, excellent. All right. So what we see in front of us right now are two maps, one of the state of Minnesota and another zoomed in onto our Duluth area. And as you can see, if we look around, we see two generalized clusters, at least ones that we'll be interested in. The first one on the left here is there does seem to be a lot of sites in and around the Twin Cities area, which we do expect as there's a lot of traffic and movement of goods, services, people, on that sort of thing. So we do expect invasive species to hitch, ride, and hike with them. But if we notice, there's also a very large cluster up here by Duluth, and Duluth actually has the worst infestation of invasive knotweeds in the state of Minnesota. We don't exactly know why to the fullest extent, but it does appear that one, it really does like our conditions, our climate to grow here, and also that it looks to be, some people brought it in early, more than likely during an arboreal trade, and people have propagated it from there. And from there, it has escaped captivity and been moving around. Here we have what we would look for if we were trying to identify the Japanese knotweed. First, a lot of people might call it bamboo and such like that. What you'll notice is bamboo-like stems. They're usually 6 to 10 feet tall, and they'll become more of a woodier, kind of a yellowish red as they age. And we'll see a picture of that later, of course. We also have these little lace-like flowers. They're usually white. They form usually for the month of August around this area. They have large oval or heart-shaped leaves, often with a pointed tip, as we can see in some of these. They're alternate, and the leaves are usually relatively large. We do have different species, and we'll talk about that as well in a little bit, but they're usually about 6 inches long. And as you can see from this picture on the far right here, we have an infestation spreading with its rhizomes, which they can extend up to 60 feet, and they form these very, very dense thickets. I mentioned earlier that there are different types of knotweed, and here we can see 4 of them that we have recorded within the region. We have giant knotweed in the lower left, where its leaves can get well over, or at least over a foot. We have the Japanese knotweed, which is more of a ovular shaped leaf. We have the Bohemian, which is usually a hybrid between the Japanese and giant knotweeds, more of a heart-shaped leaf, a little bit larger leaf than the Japanese knotweed as well. And then we have the dwarf knotweed. As you can see in the upper left, there's the stems in winter. They're usually kind of that reddish hue color. In the summer, they do grow to be quite large, as we said previously, about 6 to 10 feet tall, and they form extremely thick, dense canopies. If we look behind this person here, notice how dark it is in the very few areas that we can actually see with any depth into this picture, and it's incredibly dark. That often crowds out nearly any type of other plant that could even try and grow into the area. We have the shoots here in spring that we'll be looking forward to in the next about 3 months from now. They look like little asparagus, just a little more red color. And then we have stems with these nodes, and this is kind of where it gets that bamboo-like structure that people will call. In here, there's a hollow tube that allows water and such to flow through and hold on to. And these nodes are actually some of the ways that this knotweed spreads. As you can see here, we're moving on to the root structure. And these rhizomes, which are kind of a root-like structure, can spread out 65 feet. And as you can see in this lower right, the classic picture of the iceberg, this is often the case with the knotweed species as well, where you'll have a patch up top and it's growing, but what is happening underground is a lot more than what you'd see onto the surface. Let's see, I believe our next runner up here is something that a lot of people in the area have expressed some concern about, and that is the wild parsnip. Wild parsnip, as you can see throughout the state of Minnesota, is for the most part concentrated in south and central Minnesota. It kind of flutters on the border between the agricultural regions of the far west and the northern forest sections. On the right here in Duluth, we can see, especially along the western waterfront trail, and then moving up and then getting into the lake walk, we do have a lot of potential risk areas, high risk areas, where this is growing right next to a trail.
And this is the one, if I can jump in here quick,
Oh, of course.
that causes the blistering really bad. And this is
Yes.
also the one that City of Duluth and volunteers have been working with the CISMA to the collaborative to do pulls and to eradicate it, because we really don't want it to spread. So we've been working on that really hard with our collaborative.
Yes, thank you, Laura. That's a great point. And if we look at the distribution map that we currently have, there are not a ton of sites known in this region. And so the potential for eradication is there, but it's all going to come down to early detection and rapid response. When we see it, we have to try and remove it as best we can. This is one that I think everyone should at least know about, and a little bit on how to find it. The plant is usually closer to about 4 to 8 feet in height. The leaves are a little interesting. They are anywhere from 5 to 15, kind of egg shaped. They are doubly toothed, which means they're going to have these large coarse teeth on them and then some smaller teeth around them as well. And they'll grow in these little rosettes and they'll send up one singular shoot. The flowers, this is called an umbel. Usually in the first week of July or so, they will start these yellow, bright yellow flowers. If it helps you remember the umbel term, which you don't have to, there's no test at the end, but it helped me remember is it's basically an upside down umbrella. And so if you see that kind of upside down umbrella shape here with these bright yellow flowers, it's not guaranteed that that is going to be wild parsnip, but that should be a warning, and you should take note. Here we have about 1 month later, when the petals have all dried up and left, these are what the seeds look like, sitting at the top. Here we can see an infestation, which is usually found along roadsides and other disturbed habitat. The best part about wild parsnip is it doesn't tolerate shade very well. And that's huge because we live in a forested system for most of our area, and we potentially have the ability in a lot of these disturbed sites to plant a lot of trees and let nature take its course, as long as we can get the trees to full size, of course. Another thing I want to notify you about is it's only the sap on this plant that is the dangerous part. So once you get outside of that late August, early September area, usually the sap and the plant has dried up, it's used all of its resources, and the plants are usually a lot more safe to handle. And so that is always a potential option as well.
And
Uh,
I'm just going to add, can you go back a second,
of
Brandon?
course.
One other key point I think that helps people out to identify it is the stalk and the leaves. Really do remind me and others of celery a lot. So
Mhm.
that's the first part you're going to see. So it has those grooves along the stem, and then the leaves too. They have a very similar look to them because it's in the same family as celery. So if that helps you early on too, that might be another good thing to look at.
Perfect.
But
Thank you.
really, you don't need to be an expert on these plants. It's just good to start learning them so you don't, especially this one, so you don't get burnt by it.
Yeah, and this one also offers us a very unique method of removal. We'll talk about removal a little bit later in some of these processes, but this plant will only flower once in its lifetime. So often, as long as you put gloves on, long sleeve, probably tape them up, that sort of stuff, you can remove these flower heads right here, put them in a grocery bag, seal it up, and send it away. And in this case, the plant will not make any more. It's not going to try. And you've prevented the next year's reseeding just by removing those flowers. Again, that'll be something that we can take on a case-by-case basis if people have questions for us. But this one is a unique plant. Another one that I'm sure a lot of people have heard a lot about, it's kind of been our poster child, that especially in our region being fairly heavily wooded, have been our buckthorn and our honeysuckles. The bark on the honeysuckle, which is going to be on our far left, it's a long, stringy, usually a fairly light tan or brown. Kind of looks a little bit like a cedar strip. The problem with, of course, both of these plants is, as we can see in this middle picture, is this is a fairly dense stand of honeysuckles, of invasive honeysuckles specifically. They're very difficult to traverse through. Oftentimes, most wildlife actually will not use these areas, as their habitat. They won't usually use it for their bedding or feeding grounds or anything. They often will only use it to travel through, even if they can. Uh, Buckthorn, as we can see over here on the upper right, we have common buckthorn and glossy buckthorn. Now, for the purposes of this webinar and the neighborhoods that we are currently looking at, I am only aware of common buckthorn in the area. So we're going to concentrate on that one tonight. Common buckthorn has these dots on it, kind of spread throughout, and they're often little white ones, and they're called lenticels. Again, there's no test. You don't have to know it, but it's important because it does make it a lot easier to identify. Compared next to it, we have a black cherry, which is a much more red color stem. They grow about the same size. They also have the lenticels, but the main color difference right here is going to be the red versus kind of the gray look that most of the younger buckthorn has. You'll also notice that on the buckthorn, if you scratch away just a little bit of the bark, we'll see a very bright orange layer just underneath the bark. And this is the cambrium layer. So if you scratch it and you see bright orange, that's going to be your common buckthorn. If it's a green, that is most likely going to be like an alder or a cherry or something else. The leaves, just like, and this is for both honeysuckle and buckthorn, they're often the first ones to get leaves in the spring, and they're also some of the last ones to let their leaves go in the fall. And sometimes fairly deep into the winter. They'll usually be a deeper green all the way through October sometimes, and they'll even be a pale green sometimes into December. And that, of course, poses a lot of problems towards a lot of our herbaceous wildflowers that grow in forest. They specifically bloom in the early spring or late fall after either before or after the trees have lost their leaves. And this clearly prevents that. We can also see a lot of these tiny black berries along this branch here. And buckthorn, there are male and female buckthorn. And so some of them will have these black berries. Some of them might not. And those could be the males. But these are usually a junk food for most of our birds around the area. They're relatively nutrient poor. But the threat of spread, because they often do spread by bird, is very important for us to try and get every single buckthorn that we can in these areas adjacent to Kingsbury and the Grassy Point, as oftentimes a lot of birders in the neighborhoods that I've met walking along the trails there do use it a lot for birding because it's excellent habitat already, and we're hoping to make it even better. We would just hope to not reintroduce some of these species. A couple others that we'll quick touch on that you can't really see right now, of course, if you were to walk outside, one of them would be garlic mustard. Garlic mustard, it's a single-stemmed, usually relatively small herbaceous plant, about a foot to maybe 3 feet high. And when it's crushed, when you crush its leaves, it smells like garlic. It smells amazing. Its flowers usually, again, it's always spring and weather dependent, of course, but usually in about late May around here, they'll usually have these white 4 petals, usually on one, maybe 2 of the stems that they'll come up. The leaves are very coarsely toothed. That's, again, these big teeth coming off the edges here. And they look like these big triangles. And as we can see right over here to the right, this is what a stand of them looks like. They form a monocultural layer of just them extending as far as the eye can see within the forest. Again, crowding out a lot of our herbaceous, our flowers, especially the early spring and late fall blooming ones. Another species that I'd like to talk about, and this one we have been trying to control now for almost 4 years within St. Louis County, is the non-native or invasive Phragmites. We do have a native version, and there's a reason why this one's been of particular concern, especially for a lot of managers, is they do look a little similar. Again, we're just going to, just due to the neighborhoods and due to the wetland areas that we are looking at, this is a particular species of concern. And so what we'll notice is on the far left here, The flower heads are extremely dense and they often have a purple or a golden head to them, which you might be able to see right here. There's a little bit of purple hues in the seed heads. Their infestations form very dense stands. We do have one from the city of Duluth that measured 16 feet tall in one of the wetlands that we are currently working on. That was a very well and old established stand. And as you can see, if we skip a little to the far right here, they also form extremely dense mats that can disrupt a lot of recreation and can be a very big fire hazard as well. Just like cattail fires and such, except think of a plant that gets twice as tall and can potentially be twice as thick as far as the number of stems per square foot. Uh, the easiest way to tell the native and non-native apart is the ligule, which is very, very small in the non-native. Another one about this time of year is this little sheath right here that goes along the stem. The sheath of the non-native sticks very tightly to the stem. At this point in time in the year, most of all the natives have already lost their sheath. They've blown away, and it's just the stem standing there, if anything at all. And if you look, when you get a large distribution, they kind of have a blue-green leaf blade, which is huge. Oftentimes the leaf blades can be up to 20 inches long and even 2 inches wide. So yeah. Next, I believe we're going to skip the poll, so we'll move right into our responsibilities. Lori, I believe that will be you.
All right, so we just want to mention really briefly about how important it really is for homeowners to take responsibility for the plants on their yard, the invasive plants, because we're all trying to work really hard in this region to collectively make sure some of these nasty invasive plants don't take over some of our favorite areas and cause us more financial problems here than we want. So one of the things you can do is, for your own yard, you may already know if you have an invasive plant on it or not, but who knows? So I think that's one of the first things you can do to help is try to confirm that. And Brandon and his crew and people at the CISMA are happy to help too if you can't identify them yourself. We're happy to direct you to resources, or his crew does that. They help and help people out with identification sometimes even. So if you have a plant on your property, then you want to try to learn the best management recommendations, the recommended management control options, and you want to make a plan. So that is one of the key things. You also want to then in the fall or in the spring, depending on what plant you have, you want to figure out the best time for control. And then essentially the following years, you'll also want to monitor to make sure you got it. Before, Brandon, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, there you go, that one. Yep. And then if you don't have an invasive plant on your property, but maybe it's on your neighbors, and you're concerned about it, or maybe you just are concerned in general for the community, you can obviously get involved with the collaborative and do little things like that. But if it's on your neighbor's property, for example, you could support the neighbor by, maybe you direct them to this webinar and say, hey, there's a recording online that goes over some of the plants, tells us why we're doing this, or direct them to some of the other resources like the Department of Ag, some of our brochures, some things like that. Some homeowners and neighbors actually end up going in on treatments because they say, hey, this knotweed patch is on both of our property lines, on both of our properties. So they actually both hire someone, or they both go in and work on their buckthorn patches together. I know that's happening in my own neighborhood even. So those are some options there. Next slide, please. Let's see. All right. So another thing I want to talk about is just real briefly, we use integrated pest management. So whether it is Brandon's crew with the Duluth Stream Corps or other partners with the Duluth Collaborative here, um, we use integrated pest management. So IPM, it basically uses a range of methods for management specific to a site, maximizing the effective control and minimizing negative impacts. So your management should fit within available time, money, and goals. So we use cultural methods, which are preventing the spread, providing competition post management by planting good stuff, that plants we want in there, plants and shrubs and trees. Um, and then also mechanical. We might cut, we might dig, like for example, we talked about wild parsnip and garlic mustard. We pull those. We have, we use a specific a shovel to do the parsnip, and we use our hands actually to pull the garlic mustard. Those are some methods we use. And then smothering is another way that can be used without using herbicide. And then we do use chemical at times too for some of these. Two of the most common methods in Duluth we use are cut stump method. So that is when you cut buckthorn, for example, which you might be aware of, and then you apply an herbicide with like a bingo dauber type thing with a sponge tip, and that's one method we commonly use. And another method we commonly use that's been successful, given us successful results, is a foliar application, which means on the leaf. You spray the leaf, and you have to pay attention that you get the right timing, the right kind of chemical, and at the right time. So those are some other methods we use here. And again, I'm not going into those in depth, but I think it's really important to know that we use all these different methods, and chemical isn't our first. A lot of us don't like chemicals or herbicides, and that is not the first thing we want to use. We want to see if we can use these other methods first. So one of the things though to keep in mind is if you don't control the root system on a lot of these, you're not going to control the plant. So simply cutting the stems for some of these plants like buckthorn, it's going to come back even more. So if you don't get the root system out, or you don't get the root or the chemical applied at the right time, it's going to come back even harder, even more extensive. So that's good to keep in mind. Okay. Brandon, you want to talk about this slide quick?
Yeah. Yep. Oh, whoops. I accidentally got ahead of myself. And that's excellent, Lori. Yeah, I like to call the buckthorn effect. You cut the head off and 10 more come back. Hercules got lucky with only his 2 heads. And so as we just talked about earlier, we can see this cut stump method in the lower left happening right now. The stem is cut, and then herbicide is applied absolutely directly to the cambium layer. That was that little orange layer we talked about earlier, is applied directly around the ring, and that will go into the roots, and it tells the plant to stop growing. Timing is also incredibly important with a lot of these. Making certain that you do at the exact right time. Oftentimes for like a buckthorn, a foliar spray is usually the last week or so of September and the first couple weeks of October. Most other plants are dormant, and buckthorn's the only active growing thing out there. And so when we do work on a treatment, if that is the case, that would often be a great time. On the upper right, we see a Japanese barberry, another plant that we haven't talked about yet tonight, but it is another plant of a concern for the CISMA. And as you can see, this was planted directly in someone's landscaping. And so making certain you know what you're buying and what it looks like really does go a long way. So hopefully you don't have to cut it out in 2 to 10 years. And so that kind of gets us into our next step then, is kind of 5 steps to go over what you have on your land and what to do about it. And the first one is to survey. What do you have? Step 2 is research. 3 is then to make a plan. 4 is to take action. And 5 is your ongoing management. Especially with invasive species, usually it's not a one and done deal. Sometimes it is, like maybe removing that barberry from that landscaping, that picture directly above. that could be a one and done deal, sure. But especially if you own a lot and you have kind of a wooded section in the back, or maybe you have some shoreline area that's a little rough around the edges as well, oftentimes there's going to be more than one or two plants. And so ongoing management will be a thing. Part of the reason why we gathered everyone here to watch this video is the good news is we can try and help you with steps 1 through 4. If you'd like, we can survey your land. We can help you either by giving you the research that we have and our expertise, or pointing you to the areas like, say, the DNR and Department of Ag and others that we'll talk about in a little bit. We can then help you make a plan, again, whether that's involving us, maybe it's calling another contractor, maybe it's doing it yourself, but a plan should be made as to what our goals are and what the results we want to be. And then, of course, action must be taken. Plans are great, but they don't work unless they're put into action. And so that will be our next step. And with our current funding calendar year, we can probably only do, that we know of, this 1 year of control. And so ongoing management will be key. The good news is, oftentimes with invasive species, the first year is the hardest. Sometimes it can be up to 50% of the work is removing in that first year. So the good news is, over the next 3 to 5 years, while we'd hopefully be able to help you plan and adjust and manage logistically, we would also hopefully be doing a lot of the heavy lifting if it's ourselves or another contractor doing the first removal. Which brings us into the homeowner's next steps. Of course, you can contact myself. My email will be at the end of this. Or you can hire your own contractor. Or you can obviously learn the recommended managed techniques and do the work for yourself, for anyone who is that inclined to do it. It really, I don't have a very strong preference, as long as it is done safely and is done, according to the best standards that we have, best practices. That's really, we're more about protecting the other investments and your own, and making certain that it's done safely and well. You do not have to use our services at all. Which gets us into a little bit on your own is proper disposal.
All right. So,
Go
Brandon,
ahead.
did you want me to talk about that?
Actually, I want to jump in on this one a little bit.
Okay.
And so if you
Okay.
hire another contractor, or if it's ourselves, we would like to leave any of this on site. Lori can jump in just a second with her stuff, but just to set expectations now, we would like to make certain that it remains on site. The good news is, if there is invasive species there and it is documented, we know where it is and we know its approximate extension. If we try and move it to another location, well, depending on what's happening at that other location, it might not have an invasive species documented there, and we have a potential to spread it there. Also, the transportation from site A to site B obviously leaves a potential trail that we could leave. And so I'd want to make certain that that's just an expectation set immediately, that almost any landscaper or contractor or ourselves that would like to come in would like to leave it on site. Sorry, Laurie, you can continue.
Yeah, no worries. Brandon said a lot of it. I think the biggest part I wanted to stress is that if you are choosing to do it yourself too, like I realize, like many of you as well as myself, I mean, we live on small city lots. So, we try to encourage people to leave it on site if they can, but it is in fact illegal to put invasive plants in your dumpster and often transport down the highway as well. So, if you have questions, the Western Lake Superior Sanitary District, WLSSD, has told us many stories of trucks and trailers full of buckthorn and brush and berries whizzing down the interstate with pieces flying out, and uncovered wagons, and spreading essentially the invasives as they go. If you can't leave it in your yard because it would block access, though, or something, call WLSSD. You can also call me too if you're confused, but call them and call the yard waste site for guidance. They work with us extensively on this, so they know what to do. don't want you to be dumping it in these sites around the city. There's a lot of sites where it's green open space or the backside of our parks where a lot of knotweed is getting dumped and other types of invasives. And it is getting spread. It's spreading into our parks and covering the forest floor. So please don't do that. Please don't put it in your dumpster and your trailer too. Just be mindful of those things. Let's see, did I have any? I think that was about it with that. It's kind of a tricky one, but if you can, the best is to leave it in your yard. So yeah, another thing I was going to say with that too, like garlic mustard and some of these other plants, if they are invasive and problematic in your yard spreading, you can always bag them up in a garbage bag and tie a knot in them and let them die in there. A lot of times it will cook them, and with the exception, knotweed doesn't work so good like that, but some of these other ones like garlic mustard and things, if you do that, they'll get all slimy and die, and then you can transport them. They're toast then, but they have to really get cooked. So anyway, that's about it for disposal. So we're almost finished here. We want to make sure you know where to go for additional resources. The Duluth CISMA Google partner site, which I've already mentioned, has some good things on it, like our brochures. It also has our door hangers, and the brochure that we sent you in the mail to, the multi-plant brochure, that one's on there too. If you need to direct your neighbors there, that would be a good one. Those recommendations are specifically for northeastern Minnesota, whereas some of these other sites, it's confusing because it might not be as useful if it's talking about southern Minnesota with our climate and different things. So anyway, that is very helpful. It could be helpful. There also is the Stewardship Network website with the Duluth CISMA on it. We also have our Facebook page. You can check us out there too. That'd be awesome. Please like us. We post events and things there too. And then something I'm not going to dive into too far, but I want to point out that there's a Great Lakes Early Detection Network app. It's a free phone app where you can map invasives in your neighborhood, around the city, around the region. There's tools on there for identification. There's also invasive plant maps, so you can see where infestations have been reported in the past or where this plant is already present. So it's kind of a cool thing. You can go out, and if you see one of these, you can report it, and there's someone that checks it too. So if you are nervous about your plant identification skills, don't worry. We have verifiers that will actually check to make sure. But the cool part is people have been reporting new sites, new infestations, and they've really helped us all out, our collaborative out, by reporting. So it's pretty cool. And you could just be out for a walk in your neighborhood or on your favorite hiking trail or something, and help everyone out. And that app too, the state and federal agencies also use the data in there collected to make management decisions, and also to fund projects. So it's really cool. That's something you could utilize. Other good websites, Minnesota Department of Agriculture, they have a lot of recommendations and photos and links that are useful. Story maps, GIS story maps. The Minnesota Department of Transportation has another good management recommendations calendar and photos. That's very useful. And then the Minnesota DNR as well has some very useful links and even videos and stuff. So check it out. All right. We're going to bypass this tips part, but anyway, and questions too. I think we can wrap her up here for this evening. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to come to the table to do your part. We really need homeowners to do their part in their work in their yard, so that on the other side of your yard, in the park and elsewhere, we can all better control these invasive plants and protect all the places and spaces we love. And especially in these times of COVID, we know how important these are, not only for our physical health, but also our mental health. So it would be fabulous if you could help help the collective efforts. And please reach out to Brandon or myself if you have questions, or like Brandon said, if you want to contact his crew. And Brandon, before I jump on, you wanted to include some code word or something?
No, I think I'll be okay. We'll still
Okay.
direct them through the video.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So I guess with that, yeah, we just really appreciate you taking the time to be involved and whatnot, and come join us at a meeting. That'd be great. And lastly, the link for the recording is also posted on the bottom of the slide too, if you want to share it with a neighbor or someone else. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you have a good night.